The night was quiet until she leaned on her fence, holding a dusty old board game. Her smile carried both mischief and a kind of sadness I couldn't name. "I haven't played this in years," she said, and somehow, I knew that whatever she meant, it was more than just a game. It started on one of those evenings when the air is heavy with the scent of summer grass, and the world feels a little slower, like it wants you to notice things you usually miss. I was outside, leaning against my porch railing, pretending to scroll on my phone but mostly watching the sky change colors. That's when I saw her, my neighbor, Claire. She had always carried herself with this quiet grace, the kind of presence that made you straighten up without realizing it. Tonight, though, there was something different. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands falling against her cheek as she balanced a cardboard box against her hip. "Hey," she called across the fence, her voice warm but carrying a playful edge. "You ever play this?" Inside the box was a board game I vaguely remembered from childhood, bright colors, worn edges, the kind of thing that instantly pulled at old memories. She tilted it toward me with a smile that made my chest tighten. "I haven't played this in years," she admitted, her laugh soft, almost self-conscious. It wasn't just a casual statement, it sounded layered, like she wasn't only talking about the game. I walked closer, hands slipping into my pockets, trying not to seem too eager. "Can't say I'm much of a board game expert anymore. But I could relearn." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment it felt like she was measuring something, whether I meant what I said, or maybe if I even understood the unspoken invitation behind her words. Then, with a small shrug, she said, "Well, lucky for you, I'm a decent teacher." She set the box down on the patio table between us, brushing a little dust from the lid. The motion was simple, but I noticed the way her fingers lingered on the surface, as if touching something from her past. There was silence for a few seconds, comfortable, but charged. I became acutely aware of the sound of her bracelets shifting on her wrist, the faint citrus scent of her perfume carried by the breeze. She glanced at me, then quickly away, as if catching herself from letting her expression linger too long. It was such a small moment, but I felt it, that this wasn't just about playing a game. This was about breaking a silence, maybe even testing a boundary. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew one thing: the night wasn't going to stay ordinary anymore. The game pieces clinked softly as Claire poured them onto the table, her hands moving with a practiced familiarity that suggested she had done this 100 times before. The light from her porch lantern cast a golden glow across her face, softening the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, making them look almost mischievous when she smiled. "All right," she said, tucking one leg beneath her as she Saturday, "you're about to learn from the best." I laughed, easing into the chair across from her. The old wooden seat creaked, and for a second I thought about how strange this was, just a simple game, yet it felt like something heavier rested between us. She held the dice in her palm, then leaned forward to hand them to me. Her fingers brushed against mine, light, fleeting, but enough to stir something I hadn't felt in a long while. My breath caught in my throat, though I managed to mask it with a small grin. "Don't mess this up," she teased. I rolled. The dice clattered, bouncing before settling on the table. She clapped softly, as if we were children again, and I couldn't help but notice the way her laughter rose easily, unguarded. We played a few turns, the pieces moving along the faded board. But it wasn't the game that held me, it was her. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The way her lips curved when she caught me stealing glances. The way, every so often, her gaze lingered a fraction longer than necessary, as if she, too, was caught between amusement and something unspoken. At one point, she leaned across the table to adjust my piece. Her hair slipped forward, brushing lightly against my arm. The touch was accidental, but it sent a current through me all the same. She didn't pull back right away. Instead, she looked up, her eyes meeting mine at close range. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The night sounds grew louder around us, the crickets, the faint hum of the streetlights, the distant bark of a dog, as if the world itself had stretched the moment thin so we would notice it. Then she cleared her throat, retreating with a soft smile. "You're a fast learner," she said, her tone casual, though her cheeks carried the faintest trace of color. I nodded, more to steady myself than to agree. Because I was beginning to realize that I wasn't just learning a game. I was learning her, the rhythm of her voice, the quiet sadness hidden beneath her humor, and the warmth that came alive when she let her guard down. And that was far more dangerous than losing on the board. The game carried on, but the conversation began to matter more than the dice or pieces. With each turn, she shared small fragments of herself, like stones laid carefully along a hidden path. "This used to be our favorite," Claire said softly, her fingertips tracing the board's faded squares. Her eyes weren't fixed on the game, though, they were distant, looking somewhere years away. "My ex-husband and I would play with the kids on weekends. We'd end up arguing about the rules, laughing too much. It was messy, but good." Her voice caught for just a second, and she quickly shook it off with a practiced smile. "Feels like a lifetime ago." I stayed quiet, sensing she didn't need answers so much as space. The night air carried the faint chirp of cicadas, and the lantern light flickered, catching the gloss in her eyes before she blinked it away. When it was my turn, I rolled deliberately slow, not for the game's sake but to give her time. "You ever miss it?" I asked. She looked at me then, really looked, as if weighing whether I was someone who could handle the truth. Finally, she nodded. "I miss the laughter. The feeling of belonging somewhere." Her hand rested against her cheek, elbow propped on the table. "But I don't miss the silence that followed when things stopped working." There was a vulnerability in the way she said it, not seeking pity, just laying bare a fact. I wanted to reach across the table, to touch her hand, but instead I let my words carry what I felt. "Sometimes silence is heavier than arguments," I said. Her lips parted slightly, almost surprised at the understanding. For a moment, the lines between us blurred, not just neighbors, not just two people filling an evening, but something closer, something that felt like it might matter. The dice passed back and forth again, though neither of us seemed focused on winning anymore. She laughed when I made a clumsy move, brushing her hair behind her ear as she leaned closer to explain the strategy. Her shoulder nearly touched mine, and I felt the warmth radiating off her skin. I caught her gaze mid-laugh, and the sound softened, tapering into a silence that felt more intimate than any words. She didn't pull away immediately, her hand rested near mine, her eyes searching, almost daring me to break the space between us. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I smiled and whispered, "Your turn." And though the board was between us, I could tell the real game had already begun. The board between us had become an afterthought. The dice lay forgotten near the corner, one piece tipped on its side. What mattered now was the closeness creeping in like a tide neither of us acknowledged but both of us felt. Claire leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms above her head. The motion pulled her blouse a little tighter across her frame, and I quickly looked away, focusing on the lantern light flickering against the fence. But not before I caught the quiet sigh that slipped from her lips, the kind that only escapes when someone forgets they're being watched. "You know," she said after a pause, lowering her arms, "I can't remember the last time I just sat like this. Talking. Laughing. Not worrying about what tomorrow looks like." Her tone was soft, almost confessional. I felt her words settle into me, stirring something I hadn't expected, a desire to be the person who gave her that ease. "I get that," I murmured. "Feels rare these days. Everything's always noise, deadlines, people rushing." I let my hand rest on the table, close enough that if she shifted just slightly, her fingers would graze mine. And she did. Not by accident, either. Her knuckles brushed the back of my hand, gentle, testing, but unmistakable. My pulse kicked up, and for a moment neither of us moved, as if the smallest motion might shatter the fragile understanding forming in the space between our hands. Then she laughed lightly, a little nervous, pulling her hand back only to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You're easier to talk to than I thought you'd be," she admitted, eyes lowering for a beat before lifting again. I smiled, though inside I felt the weight of what she wasn't saying. She wasn't just talking about conversation. She was talking about the kind of safety that comes when walls begin to lower, brick by careful brick. The night had grown cooler, and she rubbed her arms lightly as if brushing off a chill. Without thinking too much, I slid my jacket from the chair beside me and offered it. She hesitated for half a second, then took it, her fingers grazing mine again as she slipped it on. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now. The fabric looked too big on her, the sleeves nearly covering her hands, but it suited her in a way I couldn't explain. We sat in that moment, the game forgotten, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, a silence that asked, what happens if we step just a little closer? The jacket still wrapped around her shoulders, Claire leaned forward on her elbows, resting her chin in her hand. Her eyes, steady, curious, held mine longer than before. The playful ease of earlier had shifted, now there was a stillness between us, as if the night itself was holding its breath. "You surprise me," she said quietly. "How so?" My voice came out softer than I intended, barely more than a whisper. She tilted her head, studying me with an expression that seemed to weigh not just my words but who I was. "Most people your age, they don't really listen. They talk, they fill the space. You wait. You notice." The words caught me off guard, stirring warmth in my chest. I wanted to tell her I noticed because it was impossible not to, not with her. But before I could speak, she reached across the table, her hand brushing lightly against mine. Not a slip, not an accident this time. Her fingers lingered, warm against my skin, and the simple contact sent a tremor through me. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. The game pieces scattered across the board seemed almost ridiculous now, as though they belonged to another world entirely. The only thing that mattered was the way her touch felt, steady, deliberate, asking a question neither of us had yet dared to voice. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might speak, but nothing came. Instead, she drew in a quiet breath, her thumb grazing the back of my hand. The gesture was small, but it carried more weight than any words could. "Claire," I started, but my voice faltered. She smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of conflict, hesitation tangled with desire. "This is dangerous," she whispered, almost to herself. "Maybe," I admitted. "But it feels real." The air thickened, filled with everything unsaid. Her gaze dropped to my hand beneath hers, then lifted again to meet my eyes. And in that pause, long, unbroken, I felt the line between neighbor and something more dissolve, fragile as glass yet unshakable. She didn't move closer, not yet. Instead, she let the silence stretch, her touch lingering just enough to let me know the choice wasn't only mine. And though neither of us spoke another word, I knew, the game we had started hours ago had shifted into something far deeper. Something neither of us could roll back. The night had grown quieter, as if the world itself sensed we were teetering on an edge. Claire's hand was still near mine, her touch faint but steady, like she was afraid to let go and afraid to hold on all at once. She leaned back slowly, exhaling a breath that carried more weight than words. "You know," she murmured, eyes drifting to the side, "I never planned for this part of my life. Divorce wasn't supposed to be in the picture. Starting over wasn't supposed to be my story." Her voice cracked slightly, and in that moment, the confident neighbor I thought I knew gave way to something rawer, something fragile. I stayed quiet, letting her speak, because the silence between her words seemed just as important as the words themselves. "I thought I had everything figured out," she continued, fingers nervously tracing the rim of her glass. "A house, a family, a future, and then she snapped her fingers gently, the sound sharp in the stillness, broke. And suddenly, I was just, me again. Only older. And lonelier. The honesty in her confession landed heavy in my chest. I wanted to reach for her then, to take that loneliness from her, even if only for a moment. Instead, I moved slowly, carefully, until my hand covered hers. Her fingers tensed at first, then softened, curling lightly against mine. "Being broken doesn't erase who you are," I said quietly. "Sometimes it just shows you the parts that are still strong." Her eyes lifted, meeting mine, glistening in the lantern light. For a heartbeat, neither of us looked away. The distance between us felt smaller now, not measured in feet or inches, but in guardedness, in years of silence finally unraveling. She shifted her chair closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her shoulder to mine. The scent of her perfume, faint and citrus-sweet, wrapped around me. And when she spoke again, her voice carried a softness I hadn't heard before. "You make it sound so simple," she whispered. "Not simple," I corrected gently. "Just worth it." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes brimmed with something deeper, something tender, almost aching. And then, almost without thinking, she leaned her head against my shoulder. The weight of it was light, but the meaning behind it was heavy. Her hair brushed my cheek, and for the first time, I felt her let go, not of her past, but of the fear of being seen. And in that quiet, leaning against each other under the lantern glow, I realized I wasn't just her neighbor anymore. I was becoming someone she trusted. Her head still rested on my shoulder, and for a long while neither of us moved. The board game, the dice, the scattered pieces, they were nothing more than decoration now, like relics of a night that had led us here. What mattered was the quiet rhythm of her breathing, steadying itself against me. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than the night breeze. "I didn't think I'd ever let someone this close again." I turned slightly, careful not to disturb her, but enough so I could see the faint curve of her lips, the vulnerability in her eyes. "You don't have to rush anything," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes closed for a moment, and I felt the weight of those words settle into her. Then she lifted her head, just enough to look at me fully. "You don't know what you're promising," she said with a quiet laugh, though her gaze searched mine, serious beneath the humor. "Maybe not," I admitted. "But I know what I mean." The lantern light flickered across her features, catching the silver strands in her hair, the delicate lines that only added to her beauty. She wasn't trying to hide anymore. She wasn't playing strong or untouchable. She was simply Claire, real, open, and sitting closer than she had ever let me before. Without thinking too hard, I reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. My fingertips grazed her temple, and she didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly as though savoring something she hadn't felt in years. "I'd forgotten," she whispered, "what it feels like to be seen." "You deserve it," I said simply. A silence followed, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, like a blanket wrapping around us. She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "All this, from an old board game." I smiled. Guess it wasn't the game that mattered. Her hand found mine again, this time with certainty, her fingers threading between mine as if she had decided, finally, that she didn't want to let go. And in that moment, under the glow of the porch lantern, with the night stretching endlessly around us, it felt less like an ending and more like the first page of something new. Not neighbors. Not a divorced woman and a younger man. Just two people, daring to begin again. And it was enough. And maybe that's how the best stories begin, quietly, when no one expects them. If you want more stories like this, slow burn, heartfelt, and filled with those little moments that stay with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's a whole world of age gap romances, unexpected connections, and tender second chances waiting here for you.